The first snowflakes of Christmas morning drifted lazily from the sky, blanketing the quiet suburban neighborhood in a soft, white glow. Inside her cozy home, Emma stirred awake to the sound of her golden retriever Max, whining softly at the foot of her bed. She smiled sleepily, reaching out to ruffle his fur. "Good morning, buddy," she murmured. But Max didn't wag his tail or nuzzle her hand like he usually did. Instead, he stared at her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Before she could sit up, he darted to the bedroom door and planted himself firmly in front of it, blocking her path. Emma frowned. "Max, move," she said, her voice tinged with irritation. But Max didn't budge. He just stood there, his body rigid, his eyes locked on hers. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Emma had always been a dog person. Growing up, her family had always had at least one furry companion, and when she moved into her own place, getting a dog was non-negotiable. Max had been her constant companion for the past 5 years, her shadow through heartbreaks, career changes, and the ups and downs of life. He was more than a pet. He was her best friend. So when he refused to let her leave the bedroom on Christmas morning, she knew something was off. Max had never behaved like this before. She tried to coax him with treats, with toys, even with his favorite squeaky ball, but Max remained steadfast, his body a living barricade. Emma's frustration grew, but so did her unease. What was he trying to tell her? She glanced at the clock on her nightstand. It was just past 7 a.m., and the house was still quiet. Her parents weren't due to arrive for Christmas brunch for another 2 hours. She had planned to spend the morning baking cookies and wrapping a last-minute gift for her niece, but Max's strange behavior had thrown everything off. Finally, she decided to try a different approach. She knelt down in front of him, her eyes level with his. "Max," she said softly, "what's going on, buddy? Why won't you let me out?" Max whined again, a sound so full of urgency that it sent a chill down her spine. He pawed at the door, then looked back at her, his eyes pleading. It was as if he was trying to tell her something, but she couldn't understand what. Emma's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. Was Max sick? Had he eaten something he shouldn't have? She scanned the room for clues, but everything seemed normal. The Christmas tree in the corner twinkled merrily, its lights casting a warm glow over the room. The stockings hung neatly on the mantel, and the smell of pine filled the air. It was the picture of holiday cheer, but Max's behavior was anything but cheerful. She reached for her phone, intending to call the vet, but as she did, Max let out a sharp bark, startling her. He lunged toward her, knocking the phone out of her hand, and then returned to his post at the door. Emma's heart pounded. This wasn't like him. Max was gentle, obedient, the kind of dog who would sooner lick you to death than show any sign of aggression. What had gotten into him? And then she heard it, a faint creaking sound coming from downstairs. It was so soft that she almost missed it, but Max's ears perked up and his body tensed. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. Someone was in the house. Nabi more emotional climax and resolution. Panic surged through Emma as she realized the gravity of the situation. Her mind flashed to the news stories she'd seen about home invasions, about people being robbed, or worse, in the safety of their own homes. She wanted to scream, to run, but Max's presence anchored her. He was still blocking the door, his body a protective barrier between her and whatever or whoever was downstairs. She crouched low, her heart pounding in her ears, and whispered, "Max, what do we do?" Max turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a determination that gave her courage. He nudged her toward the closet, his nose pressing insistently against her leg. Understanding dawned on her. He wanted her to hide. Emma hesitated, torn between the instinct to protect herself and the desire to protect Max. But before she could make a decision, she heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate and getting closer. Max let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through the room, and Emma knew she had no choice. She slipped into the closet, pulling the door shut behind her, and held her breath. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, and then there was silence. Emma's mind raced. Who was it? What did they want? And why had Max been so determined to keep her in the room? She pressed her ear to the closet door, straining to hear, but the only sound was the pounding of her own heart. And then she heard it, a voice. "Emma?" It was her father's voice, filled with concern. "Emma, are you up here?" Relief flooded through her, and she burst out of the closet, nearly colliding with her dad in the hallway. "Dad!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. "What are you doing here? You scared me half to death." Her father looked bewildered. "We got here early and let ourselves in. We didn't want to wake you, but then we heard barking and thought something was wrong." He glanced down at Max, who was now wagging his tail happily, as if nothing had happened. "What's going on with him?" Emma stared at Max, her mind reeling. Had he known it was her parents all along? Or had he genuinely thought there was a threat? She knelt down and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. "You were trying to protect me, weren't you?" she whispered. Max licked her face, his tail thumping against the floor. But as she stood up, something caught her eye, a shadow moving outside the window. She froze, her blood running cold. There in the backyard was a figure dressed in black, crouched behind the shed. Her father followed her gaze and immediately sprang into action, pulling out his phone and calling the police. The police arrived within minutes, apprehending the intruder before he could do any harm. It turned out he had been casing the neighborhood, looking for an empty house to rob. But thanks to Max, he had chosen the wrong one. As the adrenaline faded and the reality of what had happened sank in, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude. Max had saved her, not just from a potential break-in, but from the fear and uncertainty that could have haunted her for years. He had reminded her of the incredible bond between humans and animals and the lengths to which they would go to protect the ones they love. This Christmas, as you gather with your loved ones, take a moment to appreciate the furry friends who bring so much joy and comfort to our lives. Consider donating to your local animal shelter or rescue organization, or even adopting a pet in need of a home. Every animal deserves a chance to be a hero just like Max.